So I'll just tell you right away. And within the first retreat, he revealed that he was God. He was an incarnation of Vishnu, who is God.
Hi, this is Jeremy.
Hi, this is Nick.
This is Cloud of Witnesses Radio.
Thinking like the saints.
Very, very special episode we have for you today. We have in studio with us Synaxis Podcast.
Yeah, it's good to be with you again. This is Jordan, by the way, for the listeners.
Yeah, and I'm Josh.
The real guest of today is Joshua, who's with us right now. Joshua, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
For the audience listening right now, Joshua is a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. He had a professional career as a MMA fighter. He has an incredible story that he is going to tell us today and that we're going to share in together. So Joshua, we're genuinely blessed to have you with us. And I can tell you just kind of on a personal note, because I've known you now for about a year through our parish, it's been an absolute pleasure to be getting to know you and to call you my brother.
Thank you. Likewise.
Amen.
Likewise.
Amen.
Glory to God.
So Joshua, as they say, sometimes the best place to start is at the beginning.
Yeah.
Way.
Yeah. So back in 2009, I was very wrapped up in New Age ideas, spiritually, along with Buddhist ideas. And believe it or not, there's plenty of tension just between those two things. So at that time, I was running a Boys and Girls Club teen center. And then I was also fighting professionally part-time in mixed martial arts. And I had the goal of going full-time in mixed martial arts, but I also started to feel less and less satisfied with my supposed spiritual knowledge. I was reading things like Eckhart Tolle, and it was sort of a cherry picking, make your own religion kind of new age thing that was mixed with law of attraction and everything like that. And so I had experimented with that to some extent and, manifested this car and whatever and this and that. And then I'm like, okay, but is there something more? Is there more meaning than this? I had a girlfriend that I could have married. I could have continued doing what I was doing and I could have called it a life. But I had this restlessness in my soul and this feeling that I was just missing something. Like I had all this spiritual theory, but how could I find out what spiritual reality was? And I started thinking about traveling. I figured that if I could travel around the world by myself, that would tear me out of my bubble of what I thought reality was and open me up to what it could be that I never could have imagined. And so I first quit my job and started training full-time in MMA. And I trained for about 2.5 months for a fight, and I got injured and did not make that fight. Trained another 2.5 months and had a perfect storm, what you could call a perfect storm of events that led to me suffering a pretty devastating knockout. And it was pretty traumatic for me because up to that point, I had felt pretty invincible, and I was having all this success in MMA and I was manifesting, and I thought, well, how did I manifest this? How did I manifest this knockout? And I was completely spun out by it. And that's what told me that it was time to let the fighting take a back seat, and I needed to focus on finding spiritual reality. I needed to go on this trip. But even still, I couldn't completely let go of my mixed martial arts aspirations. And I thought, well, I'll go to Thailand. I can meditate with the Buddhist monks, but then I'm right there for training and Muay Thai and things like that. And so when I finally did leave on that trip, I just did 10 short days in Japan, and then I ended up in Thailand for 3 months.
because I kind of want to set the scene a little bit. That's that fight where you were knocked out. Was that your second professional fight?
No, it was it was my sixth professional fight.
Okay. See, I knew you were leaving something out because you had had successful fights, hadn't you?
Many successful fights, and that's why I had that sense of invincibility. And I had lost once before, but it barely fazed me because it made perfect sense with, in a sense, you could say I manifested that first loss because my only goal in that fight was to feel comfortable. And then I was like, well, I guess that means it doesn't matter if I win or lose. And then I lost, but I felt comfortable. I was like, okay, well, I've done that experiment. I've done that thought experiment. Now I don't need to like lose anymore, or so I thought. Yeah, so they were interwoven, and I became more interested in spirituality when I started to realize that there's this self-control that you can gain through meditation. So I naturally am a fairly anxious person, and that did help to a certain extent.
May I ask, what was your spiritual background before that? Protestant, agnostic, atheist? Just to give a little bit more on that background of where you were and are coming from.
Yeah, that's fair. So I was baptized Lutheran, but my family really only continued going to church until I was about 8 years old. And then after that point, when it became more clear that my mother wasn't really serious about Christianity, on the weekends, instead of going to the grandma that would take us to church, we would go to the grandma that would give my mom more time alone. And so I didn't really have guidance, and I just had my friends, and I had a lot of unsupervised time. And my friends and I tended, even at a young age, towards Eastern religions and Buddhism and things like that. And there was also a shop near our house called Inner Journey, which had Buddhist and Hindu things, crystals, all that kind of new agey stuff. So that was fairly influential as well. So my friends and I, obviously, we all came from a Christian background. So the way that we very naively, or how you want to say it, put Jesus on the back burner. Oh, Jesus was a cool guy. Oh, he was the first hippie. Saying these really just kind of dismissive things, basically how we could just, again, put Jesus on the back burner, not really face that, because that's like a hard question. Jesus made some pretty strong claims. So we didn't really want to get into all that because that was kind of a buzzkill, And so in high school, I was into smoking weed and doing LSD. And I think that those things had an effect on me spiritually too, to at least bring me to being agnostic rather than atheist. And I think in some ways I had a psychological addiction to LSD that led to a bad trip because I was really sort of trying to break through to this other reality. The problem was once I broke through, it was basically insanity, and so I had that bad trip. But yeah, I sort of continued, even in my late teens, late teens, even from early teens, it was really more towards far Eastern religions.
So that bad trip, did that happen before your MMA loss?
Yeah, it did. That bad trip happened when I was 15 years old.
Oh.
Wow, Lord of mercy.
Yeah.
Lord of mercy.
Joshua, I'm so struck by a couple of things already. One is the influence of that. You mentioned that shop that was nearby where they sold crystals and all that. For some reason, that's heavy. That sits it's just this shop, and yet it evidently had an influence on you, and this event that Jordan was asking about, it's obviously made an impact. I mean, I can see why, right? That kind of memory doesn't leave. And just these little seeds, in these early parts of your life. I don't know. Well, let me ask you, what do you see? Do you see the hand of God through all of that? Do you see demonic influences? How do you meet all that out?
Yeah, I think a very orthodox, but yet both and. Sorry, it's a both and. And so to touch on another thing, now that you mention it, my aunt who babysat us, if you want to call it that, she was into all that New Age stuff. And she gave us tapes, and one of them was called Atlantis Crystal Chamber. And all of that was New Age stuff. I think honestly, like, it's very helpful for me to talk this through because it's hard for me to see all the possibilities of how dark a lot of these influences could have been from early in my life. Like, it never even really dawned on me because I'm still colored by what I thought it was at that time, which was just like interesting. It was just culture. Oh, look, like these people, like their religion isn't just a belief. It's like, it's a culture and they like live it every day. And that was like so interesting to me. Of course, I had no idea that Eastern Orthodox Christianity existed, which would have been like, the perfect answer because it is a lived faith, but it was completely, off my radar. And I was just impressed that there was something that was more connected to a way of life. That's what was attractive to me about it. But I also see a lot of God's protection. I see a lot of things that could have been worse. And there were certain things that I did cry out to God for from time to time when things got really bad. So I guess this is the point where I mentioned that my brother was a black magic practitioner from the time that he was a teenager.
Older brother?
Yeah, 2 years older. And he ended up taking his life in 2006.
Oh.
But, spiritually, that's no small thing either, to be just right there in proximity to that. And, at the time I didn't take any of those things seriously, so I didn't really have a way of framing that at the time, or nothing like what I have now. But that was another thing that was going on, since we've gotten all the way back to teenage years.
So to zoom forward a little bit in your story, and God have mercy on the soul of your brother, when you decided to go on this trip, right? Zooming forward now to you being in the MMA, your idea of a spiritual journey is what? Probably India, right? You were talking about Thailand, but like obviously it was still Far Eastern, right? So that kind of paves a little bit more of that road and sets that up. So what did that journey look like for you? What were you expecting out of that journey?
I had full faith that whoever or whatever God was, that he was going to reveal himself to me. I mean, at the time, I would have said jokingly to my friends, I'm quitting life to be a new age hobo. And I would have said to the more serious people, I'm throwing myself into the arms of the universe, trusting that wherever it leads me will be the truth and it will be where I'm meant to be. So I had all the hopes. I didn't think I would come back to the US. I figured I would find, my truth. Maybe at that time I still believed in relative truth. Find my truth or a truth. I figured it would be so rare. I find this rare truth, but it would be the truth, and I would settle my whole life around it, and it probably wouldn't be in the US, and I would live the rest of my life and maybe never come back to the US.
Something that struck me about what you were saying early on about how you thought you were the one manifesting the things in your life, but then it seems to contrast with the way you were just talking about God revealing himself to you. And it makes sense that you would hold those two seemingly incompatible things together and try to make sense of those. But that's, I guess, a tension that I'm sensing in your story, where it's like, maybe I am God, but also God is outside of me somehow, or I don't know. Maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, I think intuitively I knew, even if I couldn't articulate it, I think intuitively I knew that created meaning is arbitrary meaning and therefore no meaning at all.
Yeah.
That if we create our own meaning, and it was a feeling, it was like, it was looking at, I'm like, okay, so even if I can manifest everything, then at best, that means that I'm limited by my own imagination. I did believe in objective truth. That was the thing that I did come to believe. And I believed that you could contact objective truth through meditation. I basically believe that our perceptions were just so muddied that prevented us from directly observing objective reality, which was God. And so I still sort of had more of an impersonal view of God, but I still imagine that God was objective reality. And looking back, I can see that what I had to work through, and what I think a lot of people have to work through coming out of the New Age, is that a personal God encroaches on our own sense of personhood. Like we're losing our originality somehow, or almost like an alien personhood is coming to encroach on ours, which of course is a complete misunderstanding of who God is, since we derive our being from him. But nevertheless, I think that's what I was basically working through on that trip.
Joshua, you this is kind of piggybacking off what Jordan asked about, because I'm seeing that kind of tension too, because I hear you talking about God, right? You said that that you had this sense of God, and yet you also were talking about the universe, right? You were kind of at the mercy of the universe. Would you say that at that time you equated in some way God with the universe, or some sort of, can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it was a way out of acknowledging the supreme personhood of God. Like I said, it was a way for me to feel like I had more autonomy, more control, while there was still, the idea to kind of steel man which I hate to do, the idea of what people are talking about when they're talking about the universe. They're talking about like everything that exists as one thing, but implicit in what they're saying is that the universe has a will. So that's the part where they don't tend to face up, is that if the universe has a will, then it's actually a personal God, and the universe, even in like a Hindu framework, the universe is only the manifested aspect of God, but then you also have the unmanifested aspect. So it was actually, I don't want to jump forward too much, but it was a conversation that I had later where somebody challenged me directly on that using the word universe for God.
To go back, I guess, chronologically speaking, to this trip of yours. So you're in Thailand, or you ended up in Thailand. You went from Japan to Thailand, you said?
Yeah, I was in Thailand for 3 months.
And then you were training there, doing kickboxing, you said?
Not much.
That's what you were planning? Yeah, not much.
Not much. So as soon as I got away from the pressures of Western society, there was no motivation within me. My body was also pretty broken. It was like stopping training showed me how messed up my body was. Getting off of that hamster wheel. And I just wanted to decompress. I did almost nothing in Thailand, to be honest, except for just kind of decompress and do some meditation at some monasteries. No extended stays, just day visits, and just being a bum. And
that was only one leg of your journey, if I'm correct, right? So what happened? What, you were just taking it day by day in Thailand and then figuring out, okay, next is India, or how did this whole trip play out in that sense?
Yeah, so I was actually afraid to go to India. I had somewhat hit a wall with traveling at 3 months, even not doing a ton of traveling. So I'm actually a major introvert. And so part of this trip was me forcing myself out of my comfort zone, and so I was pretty burnt out on traveling, and some of the harshness of being in a developing country rubbed me the wrong way, even in Thailand, to where I was almost afraid to go face it in India. But I did go to India. I was much less familiar with Hinduism than I was Buddhism. So my host in India, interestingly, later on, I found out that he was actually a Christian, or a nominal Christian, but he doesn't attribute his Christianity to any more modern or recent missionary trips, but all the way back to the Apostle of Thomas. So that's kind of an aside. I didn't even know that at the time, and he's just kind of humoring my my musings and whatever, you know, I was into at that time. Nothing too clear. I was just kind of searching, and not even super intentionally. The one thing that I didn't want to do, so into that trip, I actually almost went on a 10-day meditation retreat, but then somebody talked me out of it and said, rent a motorcycle, go into the Himalayas. And so I went to, I passed through Haridwar as they were getting ready for the celebration of Holi. So I've never been the biggest student of any of these things. I've always been more on the side of just kind of throwing myself into an experience, and I'm all about practical knowledge and how can I apply something? How can I make progress? So then I ended up from Haridwar, I continued north and I ended up in Rishikesh, which is where the Beatles found their gurus.
Mm.
And
Spoiler alert.
Well, we'll see. So I had the sense, though, that this really was the place where you could go shopping for your spirituality. You could go to any ashram. You could even go to like a free sex ashram or something like that. But that seemed very artificial to me. And I didn't want to go shopping for my spirituality. So I remember I went out in the middle of the night one night and I was just seeing if somebody would appear to me, like if some guru or something, anything, but I wanted it to be real. I wanted it to be organic, you know? And so this is the point in my journey where there came to be a coherent pattern of like how reality was laying itself out to me, wherever this was coming from, how much of it was based on my expectation of the time. So when I was going from two different points on that journey, on that motorcycle journey, I remember that I was just afraid of getting lost. I'm in a third world country. I'm all by myself. I'm on this motorcycle. I'm definitely getting noticed as a white person, and people are not afraid to come up to you and just be like, money problem, you know, and I really felt like a target, and I just didn't want to get lost. So I go into an internet cafe and I print out these exact turn-by-turn directions of how I'm going to get between two cities. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as I start doing that, I realize it's not going to work at all because Google doesn't know anything about India. And so then I realized how I was like holding on, right? Like I was trying to control things. And I basically put myself in a state of like feeling like I was in hell by trying to control things. So seeing this, I said, okay, well, how can I completely turn this on its head? So I threw away the directions. I just bought a map. I printed out just a map, and then I bought a local map, and I bought a sleeping bag so that even if I did get lost or didn't quite reach a hotel or something before nighttime, I've got a sleeping bag. And it was something like spring, you know, so there was like a little bit of snow left in some places, but it would have been manageable if I had to sleep outside at night. And when I made that decision and I let go, it went 180. I felt like I'm in heaven. I'm experiencing all this beautiful landscape because also I went off the beaten path. You know, I just went into, lower Himalayas, just beautiful time of year. And it was the first time where I had this sense of peace where like, could have been a false sense of peace. I don't know. But I had the feeling like, God, I'm so grateful for everything that I've ever experienced, you know, God, universe, whoever. Like if I die right now, I'm okay with that. Now looking back, what a tragedy that would have been. But that's the contrast that I felt between trying to control and then just sort of letting go and having some more trust, some more faith that even if I couldn't see every step, I was going to get to where I needed to be. And so what would have been a one-day trip if I had just stuck to these turn-by-turn directions turned out to be a 2.5-day trip. But I was able to barely make it to a place where I could get lodging each night right around dark. And it was just the most amazing part of my time in India, just me on the motorcycle. And so that pattern would repeat. And so we had this whole group of travelers that we ended up meeting and kind of going from city to city together. And we went searching for some person who was supposedly clairvoyant at one point, but were never able to find that person. And ultimately, I left India without any kind of a guru, without having really attained any kind of spiritual knowledge.
That's what I was curious about, Joshua, because when you were telling that story earlier of how you went out that night, you said looking to maybe having a guru appear to you or whatnot. I was kind of on the edge of my seat. I was like wondering, like, what did someone appear, you know? So if I'm hearing you correctly, no, you didn't. You didn't have
nothing happened. Nothing significant happened. Yeah, so I guess leaving India, you know, like that openness towards a guru within me, what I was acknowledging was like I was not the most wise person on the planet, which, you know, that wouldn't be like a big shocker for most people, but I'm pretty prideful. And, you know, so like I really always thought of myself as a spiritual person and like a wise person. And people really always, even when I was in high school, really liked getting advice from me and this and that. So I really fancied myself that way, right? So, so now I left India and I went to, I went to London for a little while, and then I went over to, Italy because I had a free place to stay from somebody that I had met in Thailand. So then I spent a certain amount of time in Italy, and then, you know, honestly, in Italy is where I was exposed to some of the most overtly demonic
Italy,
stuff.
more than India.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow, really? Lord of mercy.
Oh, yeah. So I was staying in Rome, and I was staying with people through couch surfing. Okay, which is like there's a very liberal, looking back, it's an extremely liberal global community, if you want to call it that. I ended up staying with this woman for about a month in total, and we stayed at different places. She had different houses and her family that we went and stayed at different places in the countryside and things like that. And then we eventually ended up in Rome with some of her friends, and two of the people who were staying in the house at the time fancied themselves as magicians. Mm-hmm. And none of them pretended to be about the light. Yeah, I just didn't take any of it seriously. If anything, I just thought they were dorks.
And they probably were.
Yeah.
You could call them dark dorks.
Dark dorks. I like that.
Dork magic.
So, yeah. So that was where, so so before I left on the trip, I listened to a lot of Joe Rogan too, and I was really determined to get my hands on some DMT. And so the other character in the cast over there was this like 60-year-old Austrian hippie who actually had DMT on him. And so I smoked like a low dose of DMT, but it wasn't like the full on blast you into another dimension. It was more like barely kind of seeing the door to the other dimension, where just looking at physical reality, it started to almost take on like a fourth dimension or something like that. But then I purchased from him the full dose of DMT. And then we were going to go to the forest and do that. But then things got complicated between me and that woman. And I ended up leaving like right before her birthday. Yeah. And then ended up in Croatia at another couch surfing house. And then met a young woman who I started traveling with for a while. And then she ended up becoming part of my story because we decided together to go to Romania. And that's where the story really picks up. So
yeah.
Your time in both Italy and Croatia, you weren't really interested in Catholicism. There wasn't much.
Nope.
There wasn't much interest there.
Zero. Yeah.
Interesting.
I remember in Croatia, seeing some Hare Krishnas on the street and just thinking to myself, man, those guys look really sad.
I want to thank you in advance for doing this, because I think this was a tough question, I think. But I think it's important, because having spoken with you over the past, year, I know that the loss of your brother was obviously a very, very impactful event in your life.
Yeah.
And yet, interestingly, in the course of this story so far, these travels, I haven't heard you mention it. And I'm wondering, how were you dealing with the loss of your brother? What did you just completely suppress it? Did you push it down? Were you like, what was going on there?
Honestly, at the time, I attributed my ability to sort of face it head on, because I was living with my brother at the time, and I found him. And I had to tell my sisters, and I had to tell my mother. I felt like I mean, the initial shock, of course, I reacted the way anybody else would. No, 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 just like not accepting it. But then as soon as I came down from that initial adrenaline of finding him, it was acceptance. And then it was a lot of like new age, the new age cope. As much as, it's deception, man, is it some copium. So even the way that I gave his memorial, it was just all new age cope, man. I hate to say it, but I just tried to make it seem like this was not a tragedy. Every person, because an idea in the new age is that every person is a suicide. That's an idea in new age, is that every person chooses their death. You choose your parents, you choose. So it's like this, almost like this hardcore right-handed reaction against victimhood that you can find in certain currents of the new age. And so my mom wasn't religious, so she completely accepted how I led this memorial. We like celebrated his Norse protection symbol that he had tattooed on him. That was like, it kind of looked like an A. His name was Adam. His name is Adam. And so that was kind of like the whole theme. Everybody just got up and said whatever it meant to them. Somewhere in there, I was still struggling with, do I really believe in anything beyond the physical? So I think that his death gave me the courage to face a lot of my fears. I had actually trained for 4 years and had 7 fights fall through before my brother died. And it wasn't until after my brother died that there was this fear and anxiety, because it's like, once you experience something so horrific, a lot of other things just don't stack up, including all this anxiety I had about fighting. Even though I wanted to fight, I still like sort of had this fear. Yeah. So I think the overall like experience with my brother's passing, it just finally gave me the courage, but also the urgency to like settle this, like figure this out, like eventually figure out what's real.
Which is a perfect segue to Romania.
Were you aware of Romania's cultural and spiritual heritage, or was it your choice? Was it this woman's choice? How did you guys choose from Croatia to Romania?
So I talked about the pattern that started happening in India when I was trying to do turn-by-turn directions, and then finally just went into the mountains with a sleeping bag, totally feeling the opposite of loneliness. And so now here's the setup for sort of the final time on that trip is myself and this, it was a Danish woman that I was traveling with at this point. And we were on a night train, supposedly, and I was afraid. We had like 3 hours of stop that we could do in one place or break it up between 2 different stops. I was afraid if we had 3 hours, we would fall asleep, stay asleep, and miss our train change. So I said, no, we're going to break it up between 2. And then when that happened and we got on the final, that worked out for us to get on the final train, but it's a night train with nowhere to sleep. And so I started getting really, really upset about that fact, like I was like, oh, I'm entitled to my 8 hours of sleep or something like that. And so I started sort of having a temper tantrum, and then I realized what was happening, and I kind of caught on to the pattern. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, okay, I just need to feel better. Like, how can I feel better? And then when I opened to that, a memory came back to me all the way from junior high school when my art teacher, I overheard him saying that when he couldn't sleep, that he would just meditate for 3 hours. And I'd never meditated more than 40 minutes in my entire life. But just that thought and sharing that out loud gave me relief. And then when I said that, this guy who's sitting across the aisle from me says to me, I thought you had something to do with meditation. And then we ended up talking all night, forgot about sleeping. And he told me about his enlightened guru. And it honestly sounded very strange to me, but it was like in line enough with the new agey stuff. He's like, oh yeah, my guru wears nice clothes and this and that. And he's okay with like having material things. I'm like, oh, I get to keep my materialism. Oh, cool. Yeah. Sounds like a guru I want. But it sounded kind of silly to me. And I thought, I'll just go check this out. He invited me to come stay with him. And, we were on our way somewhere else. Come to find out, we were completely going the long way. This guy was like, why are you on this train? Why are you on this train? This is completely the long way to get where you're going, right? And I stayed with this guy, and she wasn't very spiritual. That was a point of tension between us. She was more of just like scientific materialist. That's when I started staying with this guy who I developed a very close friendship with. And what I can say, like my initial impressions, like I didn't know what the heck it was, as far as the spiritual school and this guru, but it definitely presented itself as way more serious, something that I had to take way more seriously than my initial thoughts of this just being kind of like a tourist attraction for me. And ironically, I was on board with everything that this guru was saying, except for when he quoted Jesus. And I was not really open to hearing the words of Christ. I felt like anybody who was quoting the words of Christ had an ulterior motive, and they were going to try to control me or whatever. But I actually saw like my own hypocrisy. I saw that supposedly I was so open, right? And not judgmental, but I wasn't open to Christ or Christianity. And then I'm thinking to myself, I'm like having this internal monologue, this tension. And I'm like, yeah, because Christians are judgmental. And then I hear myself and I go, wait a minute, that's a judgment. I just made a judgment against Christians. And so, wherever the Holy Spirit was in all of this, I have to think that the Holy Spirit was there or near just enough for me to see my own hypocrisy in how I was being closed off towards Christ.
Can you paint the picture a little bit? Like, where is this? Because you say this school, like, is it a house? Are they in the middle of nowhere? Are you in the city? Kind of paint the picture for us a little bit.
Yeah, so it's in the city. The school, for its week-to-week meetups, essentially met in like a medium-sized office space with like a bigger room and maybe 2 or 3 smaller offices. And the room was set up with Hindu statues, Buddhist statues. It was just, the general lip service of, all the religions that teach love ultimately come from God. It was interesting because in some ways it was perennialist in that they were still believing that if somebody was just on one path, like that's okay, like they'll probably get to God, but we're on this other level. Like if you want to have, like literally this was the teaching, like if you want to have, so all the different religions, like they'll have their heavens and you'll be able to access like that area of the heavens. But if you're a practitioner of this school and you're on this highest level of enlightenment, you're going to have access to the level that only we have, plus access in the world to come of like all the other because their religions and because we learned, supposedly up to a certain level. But it also wasn't New Age because it was trying to take the religions in their traditional forms, just only up to a certain level of depth. This is in Romania. There's a Romanian guru.
It's something that sounds much more, something that you'd find in India or something, as opposed to, a traditionally Orthodox Christian nation. So
yeah, if I didn't care about the differences between the different religions, how much less did I care about the differences between different forms of Christianity? The broader Hindu cosmology was considered like the larger spiritual truth. They believed in reincarnation. And it was like, well, if you don't have 100% faith in Christ, then you'll probably have to reincarnate to deal with that part of your sin that you didn't put full faith in Christ to handle. It was kind of like that idea. basically making Christ sort of like the ultimate like safety net, but not necessarily like 100% essential. Like, oh, but if you can do it on your own, then you're probably pretty awesome, you know. But you should love Christ though, because anybody who doesn't love Christ, there's something wrong with them.
I was finding myself wondering how influential this guy's I don't know what to call it, sect or whatever
movement.
His movement is in Romania, and like if he as a guru had some kind of his own mythology of how he became enlightened and how he became this teacher with this privileged knowledge. I find myself curious about that.
Yeah, he definitely did. So it has to do with the genesis of the school and how the guy who's like the number 2 in that school, who was just an Orthodox Christian, came to be in the school. So this guy who ended up being the director, who is also believed to be the reincarnation of St. Peter.
Oh.
Yep. So this guy had a dream, a very disturbing dream, and went to somebody who then told him, you have to go see this guy. And this is before there was a school, you know. This guru, before he had the school, was basically known as a clairvoyant and a healer. This guy goes and he's thinking to himself, you know, I need this answered, and I need this answered, and I'm going to need this question answered about Jesus Christ. And he goes, and as the story goes, mostly they just sit in silence for hours. They exchange some words, and then as they're parting, then the guru says to him, and you'll also have that question answered about Jesus Christ. I personally believe that the director is sincere, but I do consider he's a very knowledgeable person, but I also consider him to be somewhat naive and gullible while also being extremely intelligent. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
But then other students had similar experiences, so it started with just a small core group. And then when the guru's future wife came into the picture, she was the prima ballerina of that city in Romania. And she had a ankle injury, and she was having problems with it right up until the moment when she was about to go perform. And then that's when he supposedly performed his miracle. And then she was able to go out and perform, you know, like there was no problem. So those are some of the key things to the Genesis story, you know, that sort of drew people around. Supposedly he had resurrected somebody, although they died soon enough after. I had seen video of supposedly enlightened people, Eckhart Tolle, some others online, and this guy was beyond anything I had ever seen in terms of that calm, that sense of calm, intelligence, coherent answers. There were even times when I asked questions about scripture. I asked about the Tower of Babel, and I felt like the answer that he gave me like a spiritual experience. Now, that doesn't mean that he's true, but there was something going on there. It could be completely demonic. And you know, it's like my understanding of the demonic now is like they actually have pretty serious spiritual knowledge. They are spiritual beings, right? So they obviously have access to a certain amount of spiritual knowledge. But again, it was interesting because I didn't believe in the demonic. Like I said before, I didn't believe in evil before this school. But this school actually made me believe in it. When I first came to the school, I was like, oh, well, angels and demons? Like, what am I, 5 years old? You want me to believe in angels and demons? And so interestingly, this school was very big on understanding and avoiding the demonic, supposedly. And they were anti-shamanic. They were anti-witchcraft. And it was actually this guru that convinced me not to smoke that DMT that I still had at that time. And I can't wonder too much. I have to just leave a lot of things to God. I can't try to perfectly understand everything.
Joshua, may I ask, how long were you a part of this school? How long were you a disciple?
Yeah. So the first retreat that I went to, so every summer they would have a retreat. The first retreat that I went to was the summer of 2010, when I had basically just encountered the school, and I just stayed in Romania until it was retreat time. And I was there around them for about 3 months. And then it was the first time ever that the guru went to his branch in Toronto, Canada. I followed him there as my way back to to North America. And I had another month with the guru there on my way back home. And then every summer up to 2018, I would go back and I would sell cars. I would sell motorcycles. Drove myself deep into debt to get there every year, because I didn't want to work full time. I just wanted to have free time to meditate. And so I would just take whatever job. Mostly during that time, it was different jobs, but mostly I worked at a special education school. So made almost nothing, was kind of living like an urban monastic. Yeah, I would just do whatever it took to get back there every summer.
Was this guru, did you do obeisance in front of him? Did you treat him differently? Oh
no, it was definitely more treating him like a god. So I'll just tell you right away. And within the first retreat, he revealed that he was God. He was an incarnation of Vishnu, who is God in Hinduism.
That's like the main deity. Yeah.
Yeah. And his wife was his main consort. And then this other younger woman who lived with him and his wife was his other consort. And that they were all, it was one guru in 3 bodies, one divinity in 3 bodies. And that followed the archetype of all the highest incarnations of Vishnu always had 2 female consorts. And so it was also said that this was true of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and Mary Magdalene.
Lord of mercy. Lord of mercy.
And Joshua, you said this came out right away in that first retreat. And so to your mind then, you were obviously in a place where you were open to that. Or were you?
I was resistant. I was resistant at first. And this guy was able to, so I'm there, and me and many other people were thinking, what's this guy doing with 2 women? And so he proceeded to break down the whole room, explain to us how we're projecting, how when a nun looks at a prostitute, all she sees is holiness. But when a prostitute looks at a nun, all she sees is her own vileness and projects it onto the nun. And he says this, and it worked. And I started sobbing like a baby, And I felt like I'm having this breakthrough with my ego. I realized that I had set myself up as the judge of my own goodness, and how now I'm going to serve others. And I forfeit my claim that I can judge my own goodness. So I had some kind of repentance surrounding that situation. I'll be honest with you. The whole time I was in the school, I was running 2 stories in my mind, because this is how much of a basket case I am. I'm like the most conflicted person you'll ever meet. I was running one story that he was who he said he was, and then another story where he was a charlatan. I was running both stories. I was writing both stories the whole time. And actually, before I went to the first retreat, I had a dream that he was a mad scientist. His hair was all turned white. He had this lab coat on. He had these glasses. I had this dream, and I'm like, well, that's clearly a mad scientist. Like, he's acting totally crazy. And then I just dismissed it. I'm like, well, he doesn't act like that. He's not crazy. Looking back, it could have been prophetic. It could have been a warning. So truth be told, the whole time I was very conflicted, and this made me miserable, because I would come home and I'd be fighting, trying to reach enlightenment, trying to meditate, not really having the results I would have hoped for how hard I was trying, having doubts because you had to pay for certain things, you know. But the thing is like, I really believe that everybody in the school at that point was totally sincere, like just 100% sincere. And I think that the love between us, even though it might have been based on some false pretenses, was real insofar as like we knew love to be real, you know. So I don't fault like any of the people in this group, and I still pray for them. So I was conflicted, and every year it would come up to the point where now it was time to decide, am I going to drive myself further into debt? Am I going to sell this car to get to the retreat? And then some years I would say, I'm not going to be able to make it. People would throw down $1,000 to just be like, Joshua, just come.
Wow.
You know, to help me. But I was basically all alone. And I was trying to get disciples. That's actually the only reason I went home, is because the guru said to me, you'll go to America, you'll become a teacher. And I'm like, well, this is my destiny. I know Jesus Christ in the flesh. You know, I know God in the flesh. Like, that's my responsibility. And again, it's not like I struggled with it. I'm like, really, me? I had enough pride at the time to be like, but like, who's like, are there really people that are that much more advanced than me? Not really. You know, that's kind of how I worked it out. So yeah, so I just kind of went on that cycle where every year I would have my doubts that would come right up to the critical moment, and then boom, I would break through. And then even sometimes getting to the retreat, I'd be like, oh, I don't know, is this real? And then I would kind of suffer. And then by the end of the retreat, boom, I would have my breakthrough. At a certain point, it also just seemed very complicated that we needed to practice like all these, like, to practice Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity just felt very complicated to me at a certain point.
It was doing stuff. It was working for you for a while, it sounds like. But then did it just kind of
felt like I was having sanctification.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it was like pride. You know, it was like about me gaining self-control to be like, look how much self-control I have. Stopping certain sins. Like, I became celibate because I'm like, okay, if Jesus is real, then the Christian spiritual or sexual ethic is true.
Joshua, you had said before that this school, ironically, in some ways, I'll say it, but you can correct me, brought you to Christ or opened you up to Christ. Can you talk about that part?
I have no doubt in my mind that had Christ been presented to me in any other package at that time, I would have completely rejected it. Because even in that package that was like so tailor-made for me, like honestly, the only thing that wasn't tailor-made for that, to me, for that package was that it included Christ, you see? Like, I wanted everything except for Christ. So looking back, I truly believe that God met me where I was, but he wasn't going to leave me there. Yeah, I mean, I still barely accepted him, you know? It still came down to that really me having to actually face my own hypocrisy, like, and it was also me finally being willing to give up my moral autonomy. At some point, I finally realized that if I really want to know the truth, I have to be willing to sacrifice my moral autonomy, which basically meant becoming celibate. Like, that was the main thing that I didn't want to accept. And then I accepted it. Nobody imposed it on me. Once I believed that Christ is who he said he was, even though I believed extracurricular things, we'll call it, you know, I still came to believe that Christ was the Son of God. He was God. He was basically who he said he was. And that for me just flipped the switch. Like, then I have to stop fornicating.
So at the same time, though, you were still believing in the Hindu deities then, it sounds like?
Yeah.
But like you said, it was still, God met you where you were at in the sense that you had all that extra baggage. Very interesting.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I wanted to ask earlier, but now that we kind of circled back to it, because you had talked about that knee-jerk reaction that you had when this guru started quoting the words of Christ, and that you had this sort of resistance to it. Where do you think that came from? I guess maybe your upbringing in Lutheranism, or what do you think made that resistance?
That's a great question. And it took me a lot of reflecting to actually come to realize or believe. I believe that most of it came from watching movies and just seeing negative depiction after negative depiction of Christians
Wow.
and how they were portrayed in movies and popular media.
You know, that's a scary thing, because actually I was wondering the same question. I was wondering, was it personal experience? But I was wondering, is it just simple, plain propaganda? And in many ways,
Propaganda.
it sounds. Isn't that wild? That's scary.
And I had very few, like I could count on one hand the actual negative interactions that I had with Christians, and they were very mild. And most of it you could just also chalk up to weird Protestantism. Like one of the weirdest interactions I ever had with a Christian was in junior high, and he asked me, "Are you saved?" And I couldn't articulate why. That was just the most loaded question ever. But from an Orthodox perspective, we know that just that comes from so many erroneous theological presuppositions, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is an awkward question to be asked.
Yeah, so like the broad strokes of it is that over those 8 years, I could say that I was coming into a deeper and deeper relationship with Christ. I was becoming more and more sure about Christ. Everything over time that was not of Christ seemed more weird to me. So that was the general trajectory over those 8 years.
Was it this slow, I guess you could say, slow burning enlightenment towards the gospel that kind of slowly turned you off to the spiritual school you were in? Is that kind of what happened then?
Yeah, what did happen,
Well,
Joshua?
all right. So here's if I say this last part, then we have to get all the way through, guys. Okay.
Here we go.
So in my very first retreat, I was trying to find the angle. And of course, one of the angles that popped in my mind was, is this like a sex cult thing or what is it? You know, roundabout, let's just call it 2014. There was a mild, casual mention of just theoretically studying sexual tantra. So again, mind you, like I've become celibate, right? So I'm like, okay, no big deal. Sexual tantra, like people can learn about this and then they can like practice with their husband and wife, you know, using the sexual energy to try to reach enlightenment, yada, yada. So that was the first mention of it. We kind of have a meeting, and then the guru's like, "Oh, I saw all your thoughts, all your minds, all your thoughts. They were so dirty. We can't do this. We can't even talk about sexual tantra. It's off the table now." But then the subject gets brought up again in secret with select students, of whom I am one. And then the discussions get a little more serious year by year. We'll call it, I don't know if it was 2016 or 2017. I had been sharing some of my doubts about the guru with some of my closer friends in the school. That stuff got leaked to the guru. And right before there was going to be this new spiritual practice, this new initiation, the guru called me out in front of the whole school and said, you know, "So I hear you've had some doubts about me and you're saying I'm a charlatan and this and that." And so I kind of defended myself a little bit. And then he was like, "Oh, it's not as rosy as you painted." And I said, "Well, it's not as bad as you painted." And so I kind of stood up to him a little bit. And then he said, "Well, you don't represent me in any way. You say you've made efforts to expand the spiritual school in the U.S., but now I see that you'll be the first one to plant seeds of doubt in anyone's mind over whether or not I'm truly enlightened." This and that. And sends me away. And I allow myself to be manipulated. I blame myself. I'm crying in the room all by myself. You know, so he calls me out in front of the whole school, but then he comes and he does something that he never does to anybody, which is I'm in the middle of a conversation standing in a common room and he approaches me. The guru never does that. You go to the guru. Right? He approaches me and everybody just scatters. He goes, "Joshua, can't you feel that I love you?" And it was the weirdest thing ever. I could not feel in any sense. I could not feel any love coming from him. It was so eerie, so eerie. So I have that experience, and you know, I go away thinking, "Oh, it's just me like it's just my problems. It's my defensiveness. It's my over vigilance, you know, because I kind of had a rough upbringing and stuff. The last retreat that I went to was 2018, and I'm still having doubts. So we're at the 2018 retreat. The guru is kind of like, do you trust me or don't you? But I'm still a part of this secret group chat for the sexual tantra, right? So basically it's time for that final meeting. So the guru meets me outside the tent with a translator and says, this is how it's going to go down. We're going to discuss how things are going to be. But when the initiations finally happen, the initiations for sexual tantra are going to happen with sexual contact with somebody who's higher than you in a school, who's a woman. And I go, well, man, I thought the only person I would ever have sex with is my future wife. And he goes, your wife can never know.
Wow, that's really weird.
So then he goes, so look, this is how it's going to happen. Are you comfortable with this? And in my mind, I'm thinking, nope. And out loud, I say, yes. And basically, at that moment, I went undercover. I'm like, no, I'm not comfortable with this, but I'm going to go in there. I'm going to act like my normal self. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, you know? And so I go in there. I basically ask succubus questions and throw everybody off my scent, you know? Just offend all the women. And yeah, so he says, oh, it's going to happen very naturally, you know? The two people have to be attracted to each other. You'll be invited to a place where you'll both be comfortable, this and that. And that's how it's going to happen. And at the time I was like, you know, I wasn't fully a Christian, you know? And so even though I had become celibate, I was tempted by this, you know, that there was a level of temptation to it. So in a way, you know, I was undercover, but I was still kind of entertaining, like, oh, well, like, is there an excuse for me to have some kind of hedonistic pleasure out of this? You know, I wasn't really sure, you know, what I was going to do with it yet, you know? So then the meeting breaks and I'm just like, yeah, I'm like, I don't know if this doesn't actually like bode well, because like I said, there was this in the background, this building and building and building of my relationship with Christ. And now here I am.
Very interesting.
So now it came up to an initiation in Krishna. So we were taught that like Krishna is it was never fully explained, but the idea is basically like all the avatars of Vishnu are incarnations somehow of like God, the Heavenly Father, but not in incarnation as the Son. So in that way, Christ was still somehow considered like a unique incarnation. Then I stand up and it's time for us to like receive these initiations. And the way that you receive an initiation is that you take your turn for the guru to touch you in what they call Ajna chakra with his finger. And so when I get in line, this is like the moment I'm like, I need guidance. Like, who am I going to call out to for guidance? So I said, Heavenly Father, Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. I'm praying silently in my mind while I'm in line, and I'm towards the back of the line. Okay. And if this is my path, show me. But if this is not my path, take me far away from here. And before I could kind of like close out the prayer with like, in the name of whatever, you know, like Jesus Christ or whatever I was going to say to sort of like feel like I'm done praying now, before that could happen, I was called to the front of the line by my friend who had initially brought me to the school. He thought to himself, all these people who are lower than Joshua in the hierarchy in the school are being initiated before him. He needs to come ahead of them. And so then I come in front of the guru and I receive this initiation into Krishna, and I feel the energy rising, you know, and we're supposed to take that as a positive spiritual signal. And so I'm like, this is real. I'm taking it as confirmation. This is real. The guru's real. It's all real. I go sit down, and then I feel like I'm continuing to have this spiritual experience. And I'm like, yes, Vishnu is a direct incarnation. So I'm just thinking, this is it. This is a confirmation that I need. So I go home, rededicated, from that in 2018, summer 2018, I start a meetup group, and I'm trying to attract disciples again, like I'm going to build this branch of the school. So I'm being faithful, but all I'm attracting is weirdos on meetup, like nothing but complete weirdos. Go figure. Some time goes by, and then remember that there was the guru, his wife, and the other younger woman. So the other younger woman just drops a real casual message in the group chat. I'm leaving. This just doesn't resonate with me anymore.
Oh.
One of the Godhead.
Yeah, I was about to say one of the Hindu Trinity isn't feeling it. Isn't quite. It's been a couple eons. It's been a couple eons. Incarnations.
He must have really made her upset.
So one of the ways that so supposedly they were also like reincarnations of like Louis the 16th or whatever, the Sun King, and Marie Antoinette and all this. And so they also, one of the main symbols that they used to represent themselves was the fleur de lis. Mm-hmm. You familiar with the fleur de lis?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then one of the students replied in the chat, how are we supposed to see this? And then he just put the fleur de lis with the central petal, one side petal, and then the other side petal just completely missing.
Yeah.
So at first it started with this nonchalant message, and then it turned into this just complete hailstorm in the group chat, when of course nobody was going to be satisfied with that. So then it started to erupt, So the woman who left the school, when pressed, she said, okay, so actually after her 12 years in the school, she's not satisfied with her spiritual progress. And now looking back on everything that's happened, it was kind of like a Me Too thing. So I don't want to get too explicit, there was a lot of explicit things shared. I don't want to get too explicit, but that basically now her sort of revisionist history, which may be the true history, was that he was just kind of taking advantage of her sexually from the beginning, when he was supposed to be giving her healing sessions. He was basically like abusing them domestically and just having his way with them, his wife and her. Supposedly there was some audio of the guru getting really upset and putting a knife to his own neck and saying, like, what do you want me to kill myself? And of course this didn't square with us, because this is like the Buddha. This is like the guy who never loses his temper. And if he has anger, it's righteous anger. And of course they gave that defense. The people who stayed with the guru gave that defense. And at first I'm just completely, okay. When things first started coming out, I was only hearing things from the side of the other woman who left the school. And now she was siding with women who the guru started having sex with once the sexual tantra actually started happening. Now, and so that's what was presented to me, right? And so there's those young women who the guru had sex with, who are even younger and more beautiful than the woman who was part of the Godhead before. And then on that side of things, there's also the biggest womanizer in the whole school, who was actually one of my friends, who would always take advantage of new disciples long before the guru ever had. And he had become romantic with the other woman guru. Immediately following that 2018 meeting, immediately when we left that meeting, they went and got together.
It sounds like Greek mythology all over again. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on, folks.
And what I really think happened is that the guru, the younger, more beautiful guru woman, who is used to being the younger, more beautiful woman, got jealous once the guru started sleeping with even younger and even more beautiful women. But then, so I'm thinking, oh yeah, this is all over. Everybody's going to leave and it's going to be an easy decision. But then my very best friends in the school, my very closest friends, like by a long shot, my closest friends, all stayed and supported the guru.
Ooh.
Did the guru's wife stay in supporting him?
Yes. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff I also didn't tell you that kind of stacks up not in favor of the guru. There was an Australian woman who came all the way back in 2010, who came specifically to be healed of cancer. She eventually died of cancer, kind of like having some doubts, but then in the end, still like believing, in the gurus. But then, like, because of that little doubt that she had at one point, the director of the school blamed her death on her lack of faith. Then also the founder of the branch of the school in Canada, who was supposedly the reincarnation of the Apostle John the theologian, he committed suicide.
Oh, wow. Lord of mercy.
He committed suicide, and supposedly right before that, his wife, who was also in the spiritual school and who had been with a lot of different dudes in the spiritual school, was kind of like not taking him seriously, even when he was saying he was going to kill himself. And then the guru, from what I heard, the guru was saying, "You're a demon, Marius." And then he ended up killing himself. So, but get this. So the disciple who killed himself, his wife had always wanted to be with the guru.
Wow.
And so she moved to Romania and started living with the guru. Yes.
Lord of mercy. That is so dysfunctional.
I will say though, it's kind of, I was waiting for that shoe to drop, and it just sounds like classic guru behavior at this point.
I
did not to make light of it, but
yes, no, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, that new age copium you were talking about.
Copium.
Yeah,
exactly.
Copium, yeah.
High dose copium.
High dose copium.
This is still to this day, to your knowledge.
I haven't looked into it, so it's really interesting because I basically just started playing it like this. I'm like, hey, if Jesus Christ is both necessary and sufficient spiritually, why do we need anything else? I got to figure out what's going on here because I feel like I'm safe with Christ. I don't know about any of this other stuff. I mean, obviously I had a lot invested in it, so it was hard for me to just completely let go. And it was also hard for me to admit that I had been duped because of that pride that I mentioned, But then there was this new possibility that was emerging, but that was slowly emerging, is that I would just follow Christ, but I wasn't there. And I was trying to date this Christian woman online, and we were about to have our first date. And I was like, look, I listed myself as Christian. I see you're just a Christian. I want you to know I believe in some other things too. And there was also some really nice Western marketing in there. She said, try following only Christ for 30 days. 30 days and see what happens with your life. And she was like, I think you're going to have,
visible results,
generations of inheritance. What's that?
Visible results.
Shinier skin.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly.
So I did that. And during that time, I think I was going to like Torrey Pines Church, which is like part of East Lake Church. It's a very big, very kind of commercialized. I do that for 30 days. And there's definitely a change. I actually had a super powerful vision. I was up at Mount Laguna, and I was reading the Old Testament and about an altar of unhewn stone. So I see this stone and I'm like, okay, well, here's my altar. I'm going to kneel down. I'm going to pray. And I'm praying and I'm just pouring out my heart to God. And he gives me this vision of a valley. And then the valley has a dam, and it's like not barren, but not flourishing. And then the dam opens and the water comes in, and then everything starts flourishing. And then it's my 5-year-old self who comes to me, offers his hand, and then leads me down into the valley. And it's like this abundance that's in the valley. So put a pin in that one. That'll come back up a little bit later. So then I finished the last Sunday to make 30 days, and I go up to Mount Soledad. I walk down the mountain enough that I'm completely by myself, and I'm praying to God, and I use the name of God that guru told me, like, this is his unique vision of God, name of God. And basically basically what I'm saying to God is like, is that you? Like, are you that God? Like, is that the true God? And it was actually the charismatic woman who tried to convince me, and did convince me to some extent, that I could like just ask God a question, listen real quietly, and just like hear his voice, you know? And so ultimately the answer that I got from whatever voice was there was that, yes, the guru was true. The guru was God. This was a true vision of God. Okay, and so this is not the only thing. Also, while this is happening, a blinding light comes directly in my eyes. And I'm like, where is this light coming from? Like, this is not a spiritual light. Like, this is a physical light. Like, what is this? And I look out from where I'm sitting and I can see the source of the light. It's that glass pyramid, or it's at least partially glass pyramid on Miramar Road.
Uh-huh.
And for exactly where I was sitting at that moment, the sun was reflecting off of that directly into my eyes. And I interpreted that in the moment as, yep, God comes down, his light comes down, yep, guru's real. And then like the hummingbirds are like coming down and going up, coming down and going up. And I'm, yep, God incarnates. And so it's funny because on a certain level, I'm interpreting all of this as like that spiritual school was real. I just say to myself, that's just too much to bear. I just no longer see that I'm that special. That I'm special enough to be one of the only, 200, 150, 200 people on earth to know that God is incarnate on earth right now. And I'm the only one in America. Just that little ounce of humility to be able to say that's too much. I'm not the guy. That's the simplest way I could say it. I just couldn't be sure about anything but Christ anymore. I just couldn't feel safe. There was this strangeness to all these different, like, just Hinduism. I don't know. I just wasn't getting a very coherent picture of who God was. I felt like the only way that I was getting a coherent picture of who God was in the incarnation of Jesus Christ. So then it was still a few years from that point before I became Orthodox, obviously.
So what were some of those next steps you had to take to really shed those vestiges of the school and all the New Ageism?
Yeah, so trying to date Christian women was helpful and challenging. So I ended up trying to circle back around for that one chick that I was trying to date online. That's kind of a wild story too, because I really liked her, but she had a word of knowledge that her husband was going to be Samoan, and I wasn't Samoan. Yeah. So
maybe in a past life you were?
Because to my mind, hearing your story, Joshua, and hearing all that happened with that school, and for you to be on Mount Soledad, experiencing that and still saying to yourself, the guru is true, the school is true. I mean, I just would be like, I'm like the guy sitting in the movie theater going, no, like,
hey,
don't believe it, like turn around,
I will be completely honest. I thought the story was going to end when you were lining up to get enlightened in front of the sex tent thing. And I thought for sure the alarm bells were going to go off and some eagle was going to pick you up and, drop you back in San Diego, California, in a sleep.
So let's go back and talk about that, because I said that prayer, right?
Yeah.
But I said that prayer, God, if this is my path, show me. And if not, take me far away from here.
Right.
So in the moment, I'm like, oh, well, you gave me an experience. You confirmed it. Well, what if my prayer was the prayer that broke the school? And if it's not my path, send me far, far away from here. I mean,
now you are.
I never went back.
Yeah.
I never went back another summer, and the school didn't exist in the same way it did ever again.
Yeah.
After months after that prayer. So you could also interpret it that my prayer broke the school.
Yeah.
I mean, take your pick. Obviously, I don't believe in any of this stuff anymore. And this is the point where you guys make it very, very clear that this is all demonic. And it is pretty clear to me. But here's the thing is like, only in Orthodoxy, so look, I'm still new to Orthodoxy, right? Only in Orthodoxy are you going to find the full unadulterated smack in the face with how many things are demonic. You know, like with Father Seraphim Rose and everything like that. The first few times that I read Father Seraphim Rose, I was like, oh, that too? Like that's demonic too? Like everything was like, you know, like what are teddy bears demonic? Oh, they are. Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you say that, because something that's been kind of reverberating in my head is that quote from St. Anthony that gets repeated all the time, where he had the vision of all the snares that the demons lay across the earth. And he said, God, how can anyone avoid them? And he heard the voice of an angel say humility.
I love that.
Yeah, and it sounds like, you know, you had these little moments of humility that helped free you from those snares. And I'm dying to hear how you became Orthodox. That's kind of like what I'm on the edge of my seat about at this moment.
I know, it's like this elongated end, like where is it?
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely not the most unique thing ever. So it's basically 2019, and I'm really catching on to some Jordan Peterson stuff on YouTube. And then all of a sudden I see this video about the divine logos, and it's Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Peugeot, and 2 Orthodox priests. And I hear this talk and I'm just like, this is it. Like, this is the thing that makes sense of who Christ is, you know, that basically the logos, the divine logos, is the fabric of reality. Jesus Christ is the fabric of reality. Like, he is what's holding everything together. And it just so completely blew my mind and gave me this depth of understanding of Christ where I was like, I don't need anything else. This is it. And I immediately named, I was going through all this turmoil. All my other odd jobs had failed, had basically spat me out, and I was no longer capable of being an employee. And the only option I had left was to start my own business teaching MMA. And I named it Logos Jiu-Jitsu and MMA. And then I just kept watching videos. I was still into a lot of Western apologetics, unfortunately, at the time, because I needed something that was just totally antithetical to the hyper mystical stuff. So unfortunately, that in a way, I think it slowed me down getting into Orthodoxy, because I was a little bit spooked by the mysticism. So, but it's like at the same time, I think I basically knew from that video on the logos that eventually I was going to become an Orthodox Christian. I just didn't want to have to learn Russian. I thought it's only Russian Orthodox. Like, that's all there is around me. I'm really intimidated about going and being the outsider. And somebody like invited me to a Baptist church, actually somebody whose kid I was teaching jiu-jitsu. And it was never fully satisfying to me, but out of every Protestant church I'd ever been to, it was at least had like a sobriety to it. Like, it was, you know, not overly emotional or whatever. So I was basically at that Baptist church just asking God, like, when is it going to be time for me to actually go to an Orthodox church? I was watching more Jonathan Peugeot, Father Josiah Trenum, Father Peter Heers, Father Spiridon Bailey, kind of your typical
Orthodox YouTube
lineup. And then that led me to reading Religion of the Apostles. I do read sometimes. So I actually read Father Stephen D. Young's Religion of the Apostles. I found that extremely persuasive. For me, all I needed to know was that the Orthodox Church was the historical church. For me, that settles all the other arguments. Like, because it's like, how do we know what truth is? Like, if Christ passed on his teachings to people, like, who are those people? And who are the people who kept doing things and passing things on that way? And for me, just looking at the historical argument, it can't be anybody else but the Orthodox Church. So at that point, for me, it was like, I'm going to trust the church, because there is this normative authority that comes down through history, right? Because I didn't trust myself in the same way anymore also, which I never should have. So like I said, I was intimidated. Actually, during COVID, I went to a Greek Orthodox church that's really close to my house, but nobody welcomed me. And so I just went back home and I said, okay, God, I guess it's not quite time yet, huh?
Wow.
And then
Wow,
we kind of
that's scary.
continued.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then continued going to the Baptist church for like another year. And then I did another search online, and I don't know. Sometimes I'm just an idiot when it comes to like searching or researching. Like I just don't find like I'm the worst person at actually finding the information I'm looking for. I don't know if I just wasn't searching on maps, or maybe these churches didn't have their profiles up on Google Maps. Maybe that's it when I looked before. But this time when I looked, this was 2022. I see all the different churches, and then I'm looking through the photos, trying to get a feel for the different communities. And then Father John had posted like a 2-minute video clip on St. Anthony. And so he's saying, we worship in English. He's saying Antioch is where the followers of Christ were first called Christians. And all of that appealed to me. And I went that Sunday, and I've basically gone every Sunday since.
Wow, it's crazy. Glory to God. That's wild.
Oh, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. I've heard bits and pieces here and there, but man, to hear the whole thing,
Yeah.
that is, wow,
I mean,
glory to God. Truly, glory to God.
Very unique story.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for being so generous with your listening. And yeah, it's helpful for me too, because obviously it's a pretty convoluted past,
Yeah.
I was going to say, we're all working out baggage. You had said you still have some baggage to work through. I was going to say, I'm right there with you, brother. We're all working out our own baggage in the hospital for the soul. Thanks be to God.
The way I see it, you just spent a decade at the wildest summer church camp ever, basically. I'm just kidding.
Pretty much.
I'm
Pretty
just
much.
kidding. It's crazy.
No, I like the jokes too. I like the jokes too. Because I mean, honestly, I know this isn't all about my sins or whatever, but looking back, pride was a lot of my trap, and there was a lot of stroking of my pride, and that's the thing in the New Age, and I mean, come on, like demonic deception in general, so much of it has to do with stroking the pride. And something that I can genuinely say, like with my experience coming into Orthodoxy, is that humility is unavoidable. Like it's not just lip service. It's not just something that people talk about. Like I have seen in my experience with every person that I've had, like everyone will be humbled. Like it's built in. It's just built into Orthodoxy. So many things that are taken seriously, and also like the church having the historical claims that it has, and then still this emphasis on not judging the souls of others. I also find that to be so genuine and unavoidable. And so my experience coming into the church, I've joked about this, but I think it's true, is like I felt like I was getting worse coming into the church. But honestly, I think what it is yeah, like my godfather said, well, yeah, Christ got baptized and then immediately the devil came to tempt him, right?
Yeah.
But I also think that there's some of God's providence in the fact that I'm not able to hide whatever's really going on inside of me, whether it's ugly or not. And that's a great thing, because now with my rough edges exposed, the other members of the body of Christ can help me to wear those things down smooth. And I feel like that is just something I never could have imagined. I never would have asked for it, because it's not comfortable, and it's truly humbling, even humiliating. Like there's times when I just flat out embarrass myself, and I want to be like, oh no, guys, but actually I'm better than that. And it's like, but am I really?
Yeah,
so it's such a blessing.
I can see God's providence all over that story, for sure. And I'm really glad that you shared that with us. It was awesome. I remembered some things about that Holi festival in India, where I said that it was the celebration of light overcoming darkness, but there was like a myth that I remember wrapped up with that, and it was about Vishnu, and how there was like this evil demon king, and there were prophecies about it, something to the effect of like no man could ever conquer this king of the demons or something. And it's kind of like Lord of the Rings, where like the witch king, and then no man can conquer him, and then it's a woman and a hobbit. But in this story, Vishnu transforms himself into like this lion creature and ends up conquering the Lord of the Demons by deceiving him that way and taking this different form. And there's like this weird parallel with your journey where like you had this resistance against Christ, and he like took this like circuitous form and guided you towards himself in a way that he knew that you would become receptive to through this, like it seems like drawn out, but he was there the whole time, like leading you along, and it's amazing to hear that.
I love that imagery.
Me too, JG. That's huge, man. It almost gave me.
Yeah, I do feel like, like he was there, and you know, I probably won't know until I'm in the kingdom which visions or feelings I had were genuine or not. But I remember one day when I went out for a drive, and I just was like, God, guide me. And I was using the signs and everything. And I went out to this hiking spot I had never been before. And I started walking, and I just got the sense that Christ was walking with me. I don't know how else to say it. And it just brought me to tears. And the main idea that really broke me down, especially being an MMA fighter and everything like that, that every time I thought about Christ and how he flips things right side up again, right? And so totally flipping my notion of masculinity and power on its head, how like he is the most powerful human being to have ever lived, and the way that he used his power completely for self-sacrifice and mercy. So that always got through to me. And I think that that's something genuine from Christ. I think that's a genuine piece of the gospel, especially for men to receive that, to be informed on our notion of masculinity. And that was the main current that always broke my heart towards Christ every time that I turned towards him.
All right. So thank you guys so much for listening through to this amazing story. Joshua, thank you for joining us. This has been a fascinating journey with you through your, a good portion of your life. Also, huge thanks to Jordan and Josh from Synaxis Podcast. You guys, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Thank you guys for coming on. All three of you guys.
Thanks for thinking about us.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Amen. Absolutely. So Joshua, we're going to give you the last word today. Tell us about where can our listeners find you and all that.
Yeah, thanks so much for listening. I hope it's been edifying. I'm starting up a YouTube channel to share my journey. It's called Son of None, From Slave to Warrior. I also have a small existing YouTube channel for my mixed martial arts teaching. It's called The Way MMA. And I'll be opening up a gym by the same name soon in San Diego, probably in the Miramar or Kearney Mesa area. So if you're an Orthodox Christian and you want to really learn martial arts from another Orthodox Christian, you can stay plugged in through that channel, and I'll be updating things there.
Awesome.
Or if you're not Orthodox and you want to learn Jiu-Jitsu.
And you want to learn, period. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right,
Thank you guys so much.
Have an
awesome time.
We'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.
God bless.
God bless.
Thank you.